our next gentleman coming up to the stage. Is best known for his website, which is known as the best page in the universe. It's gotten over 260 million hits since it started. He's also got 2 best-selling books, The Alphabet of Manliness and I Am Better Than Your Kids. Please welcome Maddox.
Yep. Before I begin, just fair warning, this might be the best thing you've ever heard in your life. So, this is a story I wrote, and it might actually be the worst because I've never read it. So, here we go. How to go from growing up in the most conservative states in America to writing a book about loners and disappointing everyone you've ever known. So, I grew up in Bountiful, Utah. It's one of the most conservative cities in the most conservative state in America. It's a state that harbors a city called Orem, which is nicknamed Family City, USA. Barf. Along with Idaho and Wyoming, Utah has one of the highest divorce rates in the nation, trailing behind Nevada and West Virginia. Chin up, DC, you're one of the lower. Seeing Nevada on the list of highest divorce rates is understandable because a lot of people get married and divorced there on a whim. And by many people, I mean many Utahns. There was a scandal in Utah a few years back in which kids from the very conservative Brigham Young University would go out there, get married, screw themselves rotten, and then file for divorce by Sunday. Like they found a loophole. You're gonna get up to heaven, God's gonna be like, you got me. Utah also has one of the highest porn consumption rates in the nation. Although it's lower now that I've left. I always viewed porn as a form of altruism. I felt like my filthy habit would employ people. Like somewhere, a young boy with nothing but a dream and a ticket to LA was paying his rent because of me. Like, I like to think that every time he cleaned a stain out of upholstery, he looked out the window and said, I was making for the nation's prosperity. I was doing it for the kids. My parents, on the other hand, have never looked at porn, as in ever. They are 2 of the least sexual people I've ever met. I inadvertently found out that my dad had never received a blowjob. When my mom called me one night in tears, and she was telling me that she accidentally installed some malware on her computer. And she was describing tearfully how horrible some of the sex acts that she'd seen, because it redirected her to a porn site. One particularly disturbing sex act she could only describe with, and I quote, what Miss Lewinsky did to Clinton. Growing up, their bedroom door was never shut. They never went anywhere together. They didn't keep any stashes of porn or smut or condoms or anything in the room because I snooped. The only thing I found were pistols. Thank God it wasn't anything dangerous like a dildo. Yet, in spite of their aversion to intimacy, my dad somehow got one in and I was born. I know they've had sex at least one other time because I have a brother. My dad drove me to preschool every day on a motorcycle that he built himself. It was a harrowing ordeal because the bike had no brakes. So I had to jump off while he skid as he dug his heels into gravel. Every day there was a dog that would chase us, and every now and then he would get too close and my dad would kick it. Take that, dog. Don't worry though, the dog was fine. He chased us for a few months afterwards until he was hit by a car. Yeah, well. Get a leash, people. In elementary, I was the darkest colored boy in my school, so the kids would affectionately call me the N-word. My teacher hated me, which for some reason I still don't know today. So she made me sit in the dollhouse every day during preschool, or during kindergarten, during her instruction. And I didn't really care because it gave me an opportunity to play with fake food, and I love fake food. When Santa came to visit our class, I was the last person in line because the dollhouse was at the back of the room, so all the other kids pushed ahead. By the time I got up to sit on Santa's lap, all the candy was gone and he was grumpy. So I asked him if his beard was real, and he rolled his eyes. He then asked me what I wanted for Christmas, and I told him some G.I. Joe toys. He said no. He said, how about a book instead? I said, sure, expecting him to give me a book. And he gave me nothing. He shoved me off his lap, and he told me time's up. And I went home empty-handed. I later asked my mom what Santa was going to bring me for Christmas, and she said, go ask your dad to take you to the store and pick something out. That was how I unceremoniously learned about the myth of Santa. The incident would later lead to my first instance of censorship. In second grade, we were tasked with writing a story about what we wanted for Christmas. My paper was titled, Santa Claus Does Not Exist. My teacher refused to put it up on the wall. There was nothing wrong with the paper, she just didn't like the title. Then she had a parent-teacher conference with my mom and told her she was concerned about my development. By fourth grade, my friends became sophisticated with their slurs, and they added the prefix sand or desert to the N-word. A regular group of poets they were. There were also a group of girls who would ambush me every day on my way home from school and shower me with kisses. Except instead of kisses, it was rocks. I know the sound. I'm like a hunchback. I know the sound that every rock makes, from big to small. The small ones sound kind of like pennies. I also know what pennies sound like, bouncing off my skull. I like to tell you about it. It was in high school that I started to work towards my dream of making video games. I signed up for every computer class that I could, including the typing ones, just so I could be closer to computers. But I was eventually kicked out of my school for writing the first ever Trojan horse. It's a program that created a false login screen, and when people logged in, it would log their passwords to my account and then reset the machine. Very good at it. I eventually had everyone's password in the entire school, including my teachers. I never did anything with it, and I intended on turning my program in as extra credit. Because it would demonstrate the vulnerability of their system, and come on. I was instead suspended, and kicked out of my class, and banned from ever touching a computer again. That was for the rest of the year. I eventually begged and pleaded and saved up all the money I could and bought my very first computer. I then spent the next couple of years becoming a stereotype. I was the fat nerd who sat in my parents' basement, programming and learning everything I could about computers and the internet. At the time, this was in 1995, there were BBSs. A BBS is short for bulletin board system. This was like the precursor to the internet. It was an old BBS where I spoke to someone gay for the first time. I was so excited because my parents would have killed me if they knew I was talking to someone gay. The very first question I asked him was, why are you gay? To which he responded, why are you straight? I couldn't answer him. And it was that single question that was the fork in the road that helped me choose the path of understanding rather than bigotry. My parents had always accused me of being gay, despite the fact that I've been in fairly stable relationships with women for most of my adult life. I once wore a bandana around my head, and as a joke, I told my dad I was in a gang. He got up and started to charge me with a clenched fist, and my mom intervened and stopped him. She screamed, he said gang, not gay, he said gang. My dad said, oh, okay. And he sat back down. Now, I don't know what I should have been more upset about. The fact that he was going to beat me straight, or the fact that he didn't think I was capable of being in a gang. Like, it wasn't even a possibility. No follow-up questions, only a thunderous indifference. Or maybe it was the fact that Bountiful, Utah wasn't exactly a hotbed of notorious gang activity. I'm not even sure what I'm complaining about. I guess that he didn't punch me in spite of knowing what I said. I think that's the first time I've ever complained about not being punched. I've only had 2 jobs in my life. My first job was at KFC and I was a cook. My second job was at a telemarketing company where I was a programmer. Looking back, my job at KFC was much more satisfying because at the end of the day, if I did my job well, somebody enjoyed my chicken. But at the end of the day at the telemarketing company, if I did my job well, somebody got a phone call for some bullshit they didn't want. I worked around 70 hours a week while I went to college and paid for tuition out of pocket. I never went 1 cent into debt. But all those long hours took a toll on my grades, and the breaking point for me came when I was denied entry to the computer science program at the University of Utah. Despite the fact that I had a job doing the very thing that they were teaching me to do, they said I wasn't qualified for the program. I was literally making more than my professors in the industry that they were training me to work in. So I started writing my website around that time, and when I was going to college. And my long work and school hours didn't afford me much of a social life, so I spent a lot of time chatting online with other computer nerds. They noticed that I ranted a lot, so I created a list of things that I hated. The list was petty and absurd. I ranted about everything from the sound of children's laughter to people who jog in place at red lights. Everybody loved it. So I started posting these rants on my website and was overjoyed when I started receiving 4 or 5 visitors per month. That was all it took to keep me going. I kept writing and watched the visitor count increase over the years, from a few dozen to a couple hundred per day. Then one day I woke up and my inbox was full of hundreds of emails saying that my website was mentioned on the Don and Mike radio show, which coincidentally was also my all-time favorite talk show. They're syndicated out of Fairfax, Virginia. Mike O'Mara, he's still doing a podcast. Anyway, they asked me to write an original piece to read on the air, so I decided to write a piece about grading children's artwork. I called the piece, "I'm Better Than Your Kids." I got the idea when I told a coworker that the artwork she had hanging in her cubicle sucked. She told me her 4-year-old niece drew it. I said, well, your niece sucks. The article was a big hit, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. A few months after the show aired, someone in Poland took my article and forwarded it in an email. Almost overnight, my website started getting millions of hits, and I started getting phone calls from executives in Hollywood asking me to pitch them TV shows, producers wanting to work with me, and other writers reaching out to collaborate. Despite all of the online fame, my website was my dirty little secret. Well, I guess my other one. My family didn't learn about it for years. My friends knew that I ran a site, but none of them visited, rather. I had appeared on TV shows and newspapers and magazines before my mom ever learned about my website. The first time she ever saw the site, I was on the phone with her while I was transcribing the conversation to my friends online. She started crying when she saw a penis that I had drawn. Then she said, "I wish I would have died and never raised you." And she hung up the phone. Yeah, not a fan. I eventually got an email from an editor who asked me if I wanted to write a book. My response to him was, yep. So I got a book deal, and they gave me a measly $7,500 as an advance, which was supposed to cover my living expenses for a year, as well as cover the cost of production for the book. The book cost me $8,000 out of pocket. I actually went into debt for the first time in very many years, and I bet everything on that book. When it released, the day it came out, it hit #1 on Amazon and #2 on the New York Times bestseller list. My parents didn't understand or really care about the gravity of the situation. I remember when I first told my mom that I got a book deal, she said, "When are you going to go back to school and get a real job?" My dad was cautiously proud of my career, but the one time I saw him pick up the book to read it, he scowled, turned a few pages, and didn't laugh. After a few minutes, he looked up and asked me, "George, why do you use so many cuss words?" Despite my relative success in my writing career, it has come to a great personal expense for me. I made a promise to my readers a long time ago that I'd never put ads on my website, and 16 years later, I still have no ads on my website. Despite the fact that I could be making around 5 figures per month with the traffic I receive. But unlike almost every other medium, the internet is one of the few places where success can still punish you. My website has been a very controversial part of my life. I regularly get hate mail from people criticizing me for everything you can think of. When I was overweight, they called me a lardax and too fat. When I lost weight, I was called emaciated, a drug addict, a cancer patient, and people said that I looked like I had AIDS. Calling me gay is a common theme, but oddly, so is calling me a virgin. People make fun of my receding hairline, my beard, my voice, my nose, and yes, sometimes even my writing. People hate me, and it only adds fuel to the fire. The first day I received news of my book hitting the New York Times bestseller list, I celebrated by going to a coffee shop and playing Scrabble. The success never really sunk in. I temporarily moved to Los Angeles to pursue more work, and then I met John Mark on my last book tour, and he was gracious enough to invite me back, and that brings me here on the stage today reading this very sentence to you. Despite the struggles, I thank you all for the opportunity you've given me to escape the confines of my stifling upbringing and the mold of my parents' basement. and to share my story with you here today. Thank you.